The Anne Arundel County Council is called to order. Please ensure all electronic devices are in silent mode. Do any of my colleagues have any questions before we begin? Okay, we will now hear an update on audits and fraud, waste, and abuse investigations from the Auditor's Office. And Mr. Duncan, I give you the floor.
Greetings this morning. My name is Louis Duncan. I am the Executive Manager for the Office of the County Auditor, executing the duties of the County Auditor. With me today, I have our Investigative Director, Andrew Powell, and our Audit Director, Brenda Cachuela. Just a quick start this morning. We're going to be conducting a presentation to provide an overview of the office, and then I'm going to pass it over to Brenda, who will run through some of our audit ongoings, as well as Andrew will finish up with the investigative side. So to start off, just a quick overview of our mission. The mission of our office is to serve the Anne Arundel County Council and its citizens by providing independent, objective, and nonpartisan audits and reviews of county government operations, programs, and legislation. We carry out independent and objective audits and investigations and other oversight activities to promote the efficiency and effectiveness and prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in Anne Arundel County programs and operations. Lastly, we oversee county offices and departments funded in whole or in part by county funds. The next slide kind of provides what you already know, an overview of Anne Arundel County as executive branch. As you'll see there, the legislative branch is wholly independent from the executive side of the House. And with that, I'll pass it over to Brenda, who will provide an overview of the audit aspect of our operations.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the County Council. The organizational chart you see before you consists of the Executive Manager, who is executing the duties of the County Auditor, a Deputy County Auditor, which is currently vacant, 2 Assistant County Auditors. One is the Director of Compliance and Investigations. The other is the Director of Audits. And under the Compliance and Investigations Division, we have an Office Manager, a Senior Analyst, and 2 Legislative Analysts, one which is currently vacant. Under the Division of Audits, we have an IT Audit Manager, 2 Audit Managers, a Senior Staff Auditor, and lastly, we have an Administrative Specialist. The County Auditor is an officer of the legislative branch who is appointed and serves at the pleasure of you, the County Council. Mr. Louis Duncan Jr. started as the Executive Manager, executing the duties of the County Auditor on November 12th of this year. Mr. Duncan has more than 25 years of experience in providing oversight. He spent more than 15 years at USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development, the Office of the Inspector General, and worked 10 years in the private and public accounting sectors. As you are aware, the auditor's responsibility is outlined in the Charter, Section 311, which gives the Office of the County Auditor responsible for audits and reviews of county government, including auditing and retaining an independent certified public accounting firm to audit the county's annual comprehensive financial report, or the ACFR. We also conduct attestation engagements and performance audits under generally accepted government auditing standards, which is also known as the Yellow Book, which includes evaluations of internal controls, compliance with laws and regulations, and effectiveness and efficiencies of county operations. We also report to you, the County Council, the fiscal considerations of proposed legislation, including the review of the proposed operating and capital budgets by the County Executive. The Charter also gives us the responsibility to investigate allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. Under the Audit Division, we conduct 4 types of audits. The first is performance audits, which are audits of operations and program performance. The second is financial audits, which is currently contracted out, and that is required by the County Charter, which I previously mentioned. We also do information technology audits, where we will be reviewing IT, systems, security. And lastly, we do the Special Community Benefit District, or SCBD reviews, which are desk reviews of their financial reports and audit reports. In terms of the work we do, we gather evidence from county offices, And there's three types of evidence that we gather to support our audit objectives. The first is physical evidence, where we conduct site visits to observe activity implementation. The second is documentary evidence, where we actually review records, and an example of that is a review of attendance sheets for technical capacity building. We also do testimonial evidence, where we conduct interviews, surveys, and questionnaires. And as far as where do we get the information and sources of our audit work, it comes from a variety of factors: our own strategic goals, the county's top management challenges, your request, any prior audit and investigative results, our outreach with agency officials, any mandates by law, and then we also review the source and amount of funds that go to key programs and agencies. And overall, we looked at risk and impact. As far as accountability and transparency, once we conduct our reviews, we come up with our preliminary findings. Then we hold exit conferences with agency officials. From that, we draft their audit reports, we obtain their management's response, then we finalize the report. That report then goes to our own internal quality assurance and peer review process so that we ensure our audit reports are sufficiently supported by evidence. Then we finalize the report and post it on our website. And that concludes the audit process, if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Powell, and I'm representing the Investigations Division. The Office of the County Auditor assumed investigative responsibility for fraud, waste, and abuse under the county charter in basically February of 25 when we started to stand up the unit. Currently, we have a telephone number where you can call in and make complaints. Also, you can write an email. Right now, we are investigating it. Prior to us, the Office of Law held responsibility for fraud, waste, and abuse investigations. When we took it over, one of the things we determined is we really need to classify what fraud, waste, and abuse is within the county because there were no set definitions. So we looked at fraud. Fraud is an intentional act of deception, misrepresentation, or concealment for personal gain designed to deprive the county of its resources or assets to which the individual is not entitled. Fraud can occur through the spoken word or by an individual's conduct and actions. Examples would be falsifying records or documents, payroll fraud, or theft. Waste, overuse, misuse, mismanagement, or thoughtless expenditure of county funds or resources that result in unnecessary costs or a lack of reasonable value for money from inefficient or ineffective practices, systems, internal controls, or inadequate oversight. Examples would be unjustified expenses, mismanagement of resources, and inefficiencies in the use of resources. Abuse. Abuse would be classified as the improper use of county resources in a manner contrary to law, policies, rules for personal gain. It also includes the improper use of one's position or authority for personal gain or for advantage over another or for another. Misuse of authority, abuse of resources contrary to policy, and bribes. When you look at fraud, waste, and abuse, you can really think about it as a sliding scale. Determination of whether something as an act is fraud, waste, or abuse really depends on the facts and circumstances of each given situation, including the severity of the issues and the intent for financial gain or personal gain. If you look at it through the illustration that we have on the PowerPoint, you can see that waste more has to do with administrative sanctions for inefficiencies, abuse, more come when you're starting to bend the rules, and fraud usually has intent to deceive that has criminal sanctions and can be criminally prosecuted. So it really depends on the severity of the action of what occurred as to whether it's going to fall into one of the three categories of fraud, waste, and abuse. In order to build public trust, not only for our employees, but for the county, for people to make complaints of fraud, waste, and abuse, and for us to efficiently intake them, assess them, investigate them, and then produce productive findings, we decided to partner with a third-party solution called Mr. Tech Ethics Hotline. What that is an anonymous hotline completely separate from the county that will intake complaints and also act as a repository for complaints and our investigative findings. Allegations can be made or received through the QR code, through a web link, or a 24-hour phone service that is both English and in Spanish. A caption of what the fraud, waste, and abuse website actually looks like is on the screen. So what happens next after we get a complaint? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the intake and assessment. We're going to receive and review the allegations. We're going to evaluate it for merit, determine the proper course of action. Is this a matter that's going to turn into a formal investigation, or should it be referred to another department that's more appropriate based on the allegations? 2, planning and evidence. We're going to identify key individuals and documents. We're going to gather evidence. We're going to interview witnesses and respondents. We're going to strategize the gathering of evidence to determine the required resources. Is it going to have to be through covert surveillance? Are we going to need documents through subpoenas? Or are we going to need to enlist the assistance of external organizations or agencies to help facilitate the investigation? 3, analysis and verification. We're going to analyze the evidence and the findings. We're going to assess witness and respondent information as well as evidence credibility. And we're going to evaluate mitigating information. We're going to objectively evaluate all sources of evidence, determine the findings, and give all pieces of evidence or assess all pieces of evidence the correct probative value and weight. 4, we're going to report the findings and the recommendations. We're going to document all findings, recommend internal controls, and coordinate with the appropriate departments. That would be preparing comprehensive reports summarizing the facts and findings of the investigation. Recommend preventative internal controls. Coordinate with the appropriate agencies as required and communicate the results with relevant parties, whether that be law enforcement, the state's attorney's office, legal counsel, or other organizations. And 5, prevention and education. That's what this is all about. To recommend preventative internal controls and provide awareness presentations for the county employees and for the public. We want to recommend controls and best practices that identify and deter elements of fraud, waste, and abuse. So how are we going to do that? If you see it, if you hear it, we want you to report it to us. We seek to promote accountability, efficiency, and integrity in county government by identifying fraud, waste, and abuse. This, in turn, will promote public trust. In order to facilitate this, we're going to provide policy and frequently asked questions on our hotline website. We're going to update our OCA website to include summaries of closed cases and hotline information. We're going to participate in new employee orientations. We're going to provide posters to all county departments that include our contact information and methods of reporting allegations and complaints. And finally, we're going to conduct a roadshow of transparency, introducing OCA's mission while establishing and enhancing interdepartment relationships with county departments.
We'll just kind of try to wrap up as expeditiously as possible here, but essentially what we have here on the screen in front of you are excerpts from the charter kind of delineating what we can and have access or rights to have access to at the county level. In essence, for the sake of brevity, all records and files maintained by all officers, agents, and employees of the county, including those that are confidential by law, we should have access to. And we are authorized to examine and audit all accounts, books, and records involving the activities and affairs of the county, conduct other financial or performance audits or reviews of any office, department, or agency, and to conduct a separate investigation of any act or allegation of fraud, waste, or abuse in the obligation, expenditure, receipt, or use of county resources. In conclusion, as Brenda mentioned, the audit process is an opportunity for an objective and impartial review of program operations, which can result in recommendations for improvement. It's our aim to provide reasonable assurance as well as actionable audit recommendations that will lead to better program management and performance and will help mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse in county operations. Our investigations will lead to actions that protect taxpayer interests and funds obtained by the county and ensure accountability to bad actors or of bad actors. With that, the slide contains the contact information of myself, the head of our audit division, as well as the head of our investigative unit. I'll yield my time for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. If first off, this was a really helpful and great presentation. It felt like we've obviously had a lot of transitions in the audit office in the past few years, and so I feel like we're taking steps. We're in the process of a good reset, which I feel great about. So it's great to have the three of you here and giving this presentation. just for my information, you mentioned that one of the sources of an audit could be from council members. Is there a particular way that, you would like us to communicate, or is something very simple like an email a good place to start?
That's a good question. Thank you. I would say an email would be a good way to start. If there's information contained that might be confidential or contain PII, personally identifiable information you prefer to have a conversation about, feel free to pick up our phone, pick up my phone, I'll answer, we can have a discussion, and then we can get the specifics documented.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask one more question? This is related to the analyst aspect of your office with respect to legislation. So, your office has been providing really fantastic analysis of legislation as we go into our meetings and as new legislation is introduced. And I wanted to ask, we get the financial analysis. Is economic analysis, kind of a broader impact? And I'm a liberal arts major I've taken the 2 basic economic classes. So if I'm using terminology incorrectly, but is that something that, if we requested, could be available or could be provided?
I think so. Given our opportunity to ramp up the skill set that we have within the office, that would be something we could take on. Notwithstanding, I would like to take a beat just to kind of reassess what we do have an option of doing. In essence, audits are a bit different than economic analysis in the essence that audits tend to look retrospectively at what has already occurred, whereas economic analysis looks prospectively forward. It's forward-thinking, forward-looking, I should say. So once we get that skill set built up in the office, I do think that is something that we do under the others' duties as assigned.
And yeah, not necessarily for every single piece of legislation, but something that might have a unique economic impact where that kind of analysis would be especially helpful.
Certainly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank you all for the presentation. I think it's really good for the general public to understand what we have in place and how we intend to move forward to protect taxpayers and their part in county expenditures. Is this something that we can put public-facing or individual slides? I would just love to share this, even more widespread with the general public.
Yeah, certainly. I think as far as the slides themselves go, we may not publicize the slides, but we do have, I think it's a 2-page briefer that's very informative. That would be more palatable for the broader audience to subsume or consume, as opposed to going through, I think there's 16 or 17 slides here. We can work on that. We're still refining it a little bit. And then as Andrew mentioned, we do plan on taking this show on the road this day and kind of explaining to the public as well as certain departments what we're here for, what we do. And that's a goal that we have as an office.
Wonderful. I would love to have that when it's ready for public consumption. So I'll wait patiently. Thank you.
I know that building up our fraud, waste, and abuse has been a major project that Mr. Powell and Ms. Cuchuela have really been working on this year, and thank you for all that. And I know we as a council are looking forward to the bolstered fraud, waste, and abuse program, and I think all of the residents of the county are too. Makes us all feel better when we know that the eyes are double checking everything and making sure we use everything appropriately. So thank you all for all that work. Are there any other questions or comments? So, well, y'all have it easy this morning to have that, but thank you. That was very informative. I think that was a good primer for all of us for what's going on, and we look forward to seeing results in coming months. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. We will now move on to our bills. First up is Bill number 9025. Mr. Hunt, this is acquisition of real property by gift.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. I have Chris Daniels, our real estate manager, and Christine Nieder, our senior assistant county attorney. Bill 9025, this is related to the Resolution 3425, the property acquisition for Glebe Heights and Shipley. Specifically, this bill is related to the Glebe Heights acquisition. It is legislation authorizing the county to accept a partial gift. And the reason for accepting a partial gift for Glebe Heights is that we are purchasing it for about $1 million less than the assessed value, the appraised value. And so that $1 million difference constitutes a gift to the county. And so legislation is required for us to accept gifts. We're happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments on this one? I think we're good.
Okay.
So, thank you all for coming up. I don't think we have any questions on that one today. All right, bill number 9125, Clean Energy Loan Program. And Ms. Rodvian, this is your bill. Ms. Rodvian, this one's your bill. No, I'm so sorry. No problem.
The PACE program, sorry, could I just need a minute to grab my notes. So the PACE program is basically a program that was established by the state and is in county law that allows, well, this bill would allow both residential and commercial properties to make investments that would allow them to operate more energy efficient, more using more clean energy. And it's basically sort of administered by the County Office of Finance, but it is and it's basically a loan program. So residents or business owners, can apply to, apply to do some sort of clean energy project and obtain a loan through this program. The loan itself would actually come from a third party, a local bank, but it would be administered, the repayment of the loan would be administered by the county through the tax assessment. And so it's just a way to, and the banks that would be involved would still use the same sort of, credit requirements that they would use for, any, for example, a mortgage or a personal loan, whatever kind of requirements they feel are appropriate. So it just provides another avenue to residents and business owners to make their homes and their business operations operate more energy efficient. And it's an existing program. This basically expands the cap or brings the cap up to $50,000 because expenses, things have gotten more expensive over time. So the original cap was $25,000 and now the cap is $50,000, allowing for, slightly more larger investments. And I ask for your support.
So I understand the intent. I'm not real clear on how it works. Can you explain how it worked from the county side? There doesn't appear, this is not a loan from the county. So what would be how would this be administered on the county side, and what would that cost be for us on the county side to do that administration?
Sorry, technical issue. Brian Shank, Financial Services Manager in the Office of Finance. The way the program works from the finance perspective is that the property owner will go out and seek a third-party loan. Commercial loans, typically right now, there's about 6 of them, 7 of them that exist. And what they'll do is they'll work with that lender to finance whatever project they're working on. For example, one of the projects was Arundel Mills. They actually had work done on the project for building that facility, putting whatever enhancement is there. They'll work with that lender to gain the financing, and then they will notify the county that they've basically obtained this PACE loan. The county needs to go through a process to review the loan agreement, to necessarily record the document into land records, and then once those numbers have been settled, again, we're kind of independent from that process, we don't actually get involved in the nuts and bolts there, they'll advise us as to what the loan repayment schedule is. And then each year, we'll adjust the tax bills to reflect that actual collection loan. So for example, For Arundel Mills, their general loan agreement, which was about $2 million, they have about $200,000 they collect through the tax bill every year. So there'll be a specific line item that appears on the tax bill that shows that amount that the property owner needs to repay. When the tax bill is paid as normal, those funds go into essentially a special revenue fund that ultimately we will then disperse to the lender according to their schedule. So basically, the long and short of it, from a finance perspective, we just really need to know what the numbers are, and then we'll put that money in an account until we disperse it to the lender for their repayment schedule. But they tell us everything up front before we even bill the tax bills every year.
So if someone's applying for one of these loans, they don't have to contact the county. The banks will take care of all that, depending on the type of loan is, then the banks will inform you, and then it's handled that way.
That's correct, yes. We're basically, we're kind of an observer to the process versus being involved in the technical elements. The only part that's technical for us is knowing what the repayment schedule is, what the dollar amounts are, and then ultimately who we need to repay, because whatever we collect from the property owner, we remit to the third-party bank.
And you use the example of Arundel Mills, but this is available to private homeowners as well, not just commercial, or is this just commercial?
Currently, it's just commercial
Oh, okay.
properties, and most of the properties are larger projects. The most recent one we have, I drive by it every day, as a matter of fact, is the senior living facility that's in Pasadena, the one that was just built on Route 2. Okay. That facility does utilize a PACE loan, and I believe it was basically financed the entire project. Residential property owners are not eligible for this right now.
Okay. Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what are the advantages of someone, if they can go out and they can get the private loan, and you might not be the right person to ask, and that's okay if that ends up being the answer, but if someone can go out and get a loan from a private institution, the county's not involved in approving the loan, the county's not involved in setting the terms, what are the advantages to the property owner for then utilizing this PACE program versus just staying 100% in the private lane, if that makes
Almost
sense?
as if someone took out, say, like a home equity loan on their property for financing something.
Right, exactly.
I think that's kind of the nutshell, is that by ensuring it's assessed against the tax bill, there's almost 100% collection rate based on the fact that it's a charge that appears on the tax bill. As we know, if property doesn't pay its tax bill, it goes to tax sale. So the mortgage companies, rather than having to rely on independent payment, they might necessarily be seeing those payments come through the tax bill, and therefore there's a 100% collection rate on that.
So less risk essentially for the financial institution, which may then be paid forward in more likely to be approved, maybe better terms for the property owner.
That would seem to be the case for the most part. And I think that's why it restricts in many respects to the larger commercial properties, because in those respects, it affects the tax bill so dramatically because of the payment schedule and the way that the program works. It's just really a question of ultimately, from the financer's standpoint, what is a better risk for them versus what is a better financing deal for them.
And Ms. Rodriguez, you had said the maximum loan amount right now is $25,000, or is?
I think I have it backwards.
I would have to clarify that.
It's the floor. Yeah, thank you.
Commercially, loans right now have to have a minimum amount. They have to finance at least $25,000,
Okay.
which is why for the loans that we see there, I think the average amount is about $3.6 million for those. Now, some of them are very high, like the property I talked about, the Pasadena senior facility. That's a $17 million loan, whereas for Arundel Mills, it's $2 million. So you get an average that's kind of weighted towards Arundel Mill, or not Arundel Mills, towards that senior center. But the lowest one we currently have is about $200,000. So all the commercial ones are at least in excess of $25,000. If I understand the legislation correctly, this would open up to residential, but it would cap it at $50,000. So these larger commercial projects may not work anymore because none of these we see are below $50,000. They're all in excess of at least $100,000.
Thank you.
Ms. Fiedler.
I might have another question. Sorry, that's something you just said. I spurred a question. But anyway, understanding that currently Anne Arundel County doesn't have this expanded loan provision. Are there other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland who have expanded to this degree?
I had not done the research to look into that. I'm more than happy to look into that, though. But to the extent that I know, the other jurisdictions do have a PACE program. It's strictly commercial. But I
Okay,
can certainly confirm that one way or the other.
that would be wonderful, thank you.
Ms. Ravi?
Thank you. I just wanted to declare that the intent of this bill is to take the allowance that the state has provided to expand to residential. I think there may have been some language in the legislation that we thought we clarified all the pieces in the legislation. We basically found, sort of a mistake in the language, and we thought we clarified it, but I think there's maybe still a piece somewhere in the legislation that it appears to be only for commercial, but the intent here is actually to take the expansion allowed under the state program to include residential projects as well. And so there probably will be an amendment to find and correct that other piece.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right.
I will just add, we do have Matt Fleming here, our Executive Director of our Resilience Authority for Anne Arundel County and the City of Annapolis, who I believe was also involved at the state level with the Department of Natural Resources when they created that. So he's an excellent resource if anyone has any questions for him.
Since Mr. Fleming, do you know, looking at this, do you believe that there is a market on the residential side for people to seek these loans?
There we go. I do. Thank you. It's nice to see everybody again. So when I was with the state, we actually had a similar program. We had a shoreline erosion control loan, and it was certainly oversubscribed. It allowed the state to go out there and try to advance innovative projects. I think with what is being done here, it provides another tool in the toolbox. And what I'm seeing here now in this role is, we're going out on 2 or 3 site visits a week where we're meeting with property owners, commercial, private downtown businesses in Annapolis, and it just provides us another opportunity to, after we provide technical assistance, here's another resource you can look into to take a project from concept to implementation. So I do think that this will help fill some of the gaps that we're seeing.
Ms. Rabi?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, like some of the projects that might, be interesting or might be of value specifically to residential owners would be like adding solar panels to your home or setting up a geothermal, heating and cooling system in your for your home. I'm trying to think of other, do you have other examples? To me, those are probably the biggest ones that come to mind.
I can certainly maybe answer that a little bit. The county does offer currently geothermal and solar energy tax credit programs, and those are pretty big programs for the number that we see on a given year. I'd say there's probably at least 400 people who apply for those kind of projects on a yearly basis. So this might feed into that. Another program that comes up is high performance buildings, and since I believe part of the legislation does allow for people to look at efficiency, that may also kind of feed in that. And there's definitely a lot of demand for high efficiency properties that are essentially energy efficient, whether it's the internal systems themselves, hot water heaters, things like that, or even some of the insulation. So depending upon what the homeowners can do, there's probably a few things that are out there for that.
Ms. Ledbetter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I was marinating on the previous conversation, thought of another question. You had mentioned one of the advantages that banks might see in this is the fact that the county is collecting the money and they're more likely to not have a default. And with the scenario you described of a property going to tax sale, so if, let's say, someone isn't paying their property tax bill, including this portion of the loan repayment, it does go to tax sale for the lien. Does being a participant in this program change who gets paid? Because when you put the lien against the house, you get your first lien, your second. There's an order of priority. Does being a participant in this alter that, or is it how it is recorded?
There are certain technical elements that do come into play with this when the property goes to tax sale. Currently, with the 6 or 7 loan agreements that are out there now for the commercial properties, the Office of Finance does have to notify the bank that has secured that loan, as well as the property owner, as soon as they have not paid that bill. So for example, if October 1st came around and we have a property owner that hadn't paid that, we have to notify the bank that the property appears to be in default at this point in time with regards to the tax bill. Now, timing issues being what they are, it wouldn't be on October 1st. It would certainly be once we've had a chance to process all the tax payments. So before it gets to tax sale, we'd have to notify the bank that they were essentially in default at that point in time. If the property goes all the way to the tax sale process, second Tuesday in June, depending upon how the timing works out, when the county sells that lien, the lien holder pays all of the components of the tax bill. So they're paying the real estate taxes, county and state. They're paying any of the charges that appear on the tax bill, solid waste, anything else. That would include this loan agreement. The county would then have collected those funds through the lien holder's payment, and then we could pay the appropriate parties with that money. So the bank ultimately would be made whole through the payment by the lien holder when they purchase the lien, purchasing the property at tax sale.
And it doesn't sound like there's any increased risk to the county. The county is still going to get what the county is owed as well.
Yeah, our component really would be the charges that we assess, such as the county real estate taxes, the solid waste charge, stormwater remediation, bay restoration fee, those particular components. The county is not, to the extent that I've seen the other loan agreements, the county is not on the hook for the loan repayment. We are not a party to it. We're just simply an agent who collects those funds and then remits them. If the property owner chooses not to pay those portion of the taxes, ultimately they get collected through tax sale. So if they make a partial payment, they'll still get the tax sale.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. Pickard.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So can we go back to something that you said about creating a maximum? The scope of this caps a loan to be no greater than 50,000. So does that eliminate the opportunity for those larger commercial projects?
As currently worded, that's my understanding, is it basically by opening up the door for every property, because the current law says commercial properties only. That language is stricken, but then it changes the minimum of 25,000 to a maximum of 50,000. So essentially any of the properties that would want a larger program, for example, again, Arundel Mills that had a $2 million PACE loan, they wouldn't be able to do that because the cap would be 50,000. Whereas right now there is no cap, there's just a minimum amount.
So is there, well, so there's amendments that are going to be needed? Okay, because that was
Yes.
not the intent of the bill.
Correct.
But is there a reason to create a maximum for a residential property? Or is that part of state code?
I don't think there's anything in state code that's
Is
established
there-
a cap.
Is there a reason to create a minimum?
I think the minimum was simply a question of technicality.
Okay.
You know, that way someone wasn't going out and getting a $1,000 project to finance for a commercial property. It would basically kind of set a threshold for if you're going to look for this loan, your project has to be of a certain size.
Yeah, because a $1,000 loan, it's not worth the paperwork to qualify for the, okay. So is it the intent of, are you intended to change that, I guess?
There are definitely some changes that
Okay.
need to be made in the amendment, but I think we're kind of clarifying where we hope to land after amendment.
Okay. So are we going to do something that, is the plan to do something that creates some sort of threshold for commercial and, or some sort of threshold for residential property that's different from commercial, or just pulling it all together for both?
They would be different thresholds.
Councilmember, if I may, to
Sure.
address, I think, part of the discussion. Chris Trummer, our budget officer. The reason that the council may want to consider a minimum is because, as Mr. Schenk mentioned, there is an administrative portion that the Office of Finance has to do. And if you refer to the fiscal note, there is a potential, depending on how much activity the new bill or the new code would generate, that if there's a lot of increased activity, they may need an additional position to administer all of that. So going back to his point, if you have someone that applies for a PACE loan for $500, $1,000, that could dramatically increase the universe, and you get in the, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
So I think if the council's looking at amendments or intent, you should look at, do you want a maximum cap, and what should a reasonable minimum be? So I just wanted to make sure that was part of the discussion.
Sure, Madam Chair. So what, originally, as it's drafted now, there's a minimum of $25,000 in the code for commercial property?
That is correct.
So
The
is
existing
that
code.
the appropriate threshold? Or would you lower that for residential, or?
Depending upon the nature of the projects, again, I'll go back to some of the stuff that I'm familiar with, which is the solar energy projects, the geothermal projects that we see from property owners who see this. Those projects typically start about $20,000 to $30,000. So a property owner who's getting solar panels on their roof or getting a geothermal system, those bare minimum sometimes are $15,000 if they're getting a very small system. But most of them, for the large part, are between $20,000 and $30,000 for residential solar or even geothermal. If they have to do more, for example, if they're doing just the geothermal heat pump, that's one thing. But if they also have to put in the tubes that go in the ground where they're actually doing excavation and putting those in, those can get up to about $100,000 in the blink of an eye, just because of the amount of excavation that goes in and then the hardware that goes into the ground at that point in time. So some of these projects, even for residential properties, can get very expensive.
So is there some sort of benefit to putting a maximum on residential, or just maybe the minimum to keep the administrative aspects of it?
I think from what Chris is saying, and I would have to agree, is a minimum is probably a better amount, just to keep people from necessarily getting very small projects that perhaps a consumer loan might be better associated with it, versus PACE financing, which perhaps might be for a larger project or something like that. And that would be a question, I think, ultimately of a policy nature. But from an administrative standpoint, if there was a minimum on these kind of projects, it would certainly keep the scale to an appropriate level versus perhaps having lots of smaller loans out there. We'd have just larger loans.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of quick questions. I don't know if you specifically said it earlier. You are in support of this direction, this bill?
I think, based on Mr. Fleming's comments, I think this is, expanding the PACE program to allow for residential projects is a good thing to address some of the challenges we see related to climate change and resilience.
And the second piece.
I would just, sorry, but to add on to that, we do want some clarity on the discussions that we've had about the mins and the maxes and things like that. But I think Mr. Hunt is saying that the administration supports the concept. So support with amendments is what would happen across the street, but we don't really do that, so.
Yeah, and we definitely acknowledge, I definitely acknowledge that there are some amendments needing. We were trying to, write with what goes with the state, what is allowed under the state law, but we have some tweaking to do.
And then the other one's just a technicality, the eligibility with the 100% interest. Now that obviously, just for clarity, I know what it means, but for the public, that could be multiple owners who own a property. Do they both have to be on the loan as well to request that, or?
That's a very good question, Councilmember Smith. I think with the commercial loans that we've seen, there's only a single property owner. It's a public entity, like a business of some kind. So it's a corporate entity that's been organized under the law. I would presume, and again, this is my area of expertise, if the property owner or property owners are seeking a loan, they're going to have to enter in a loan agreement as both co-owners of that, versus, say, an individual who seeks their own loan and perhaps, without getting into social questions, perhaps one of the property owners has a private loan and the other owner is not aware of that, or enters it in their own agreement. With both people being on the tax bill, I would assume that the PACE loan agents would want all signatories
Okay,
involved.
understood. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I don't want to make any assumptions. The loan program, this is completely separate than, say, the permitting process. So when we start talking about residences and you have someone who has, let's say it's a water line, a shoreline restoration project that they're looking to finance, or maybe they want to put in solar panels on a corner of their property, they would need to pursue in one lane, meeting all of the requirements of state and county code. And in a separate lane, they're pursuing their financing options. This just introduces PACE as a potential financing option, and there's nothing in the PACE program that dictates location or size, or that's all going to be by state and local code as far as location and size. Would that be fair? And I'm not sure who I'm throwing it out there for whoever might have that answer.
I think we're all nodding our heads, yes.
Yes. Thank you.
The PACE program doesn't touch state or local requirements in terms of permitting, in terms of the actual project. So if for some reason the project doesn't or cannot meet, state or local requirements, then hopefully we wouldn't even get to financing.
Right. Okay. I thought that was going to be the answer, but I just wanted to make sure so that we're crystal clear. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anything else from the panel? Thank you very much. We appreciate it. All right, next bill is Bill number 9225, Cottage Home Development. Mr. Smith, this is your bill.
Madam Chair, this is a version of the previous bill that was submitted earlier this year that was withdrawn to make some adjustments and to meet some of the intent for the county as far as what they were looking for. The name was sort of changed a little bit to draw interest in exactly what we're trying to creating with this particular type of development. Again, as was mentioned earlier, this is another tool in a tool belt that allows affordable housing to be developed in a way that can meet the demand and the needs that exist here in Anne Arundel County. This type of development is occurring throughout the country. We've seen many different versions of this, and they have been, at least in my perspective, successful. And so this is just an effort to get this type of tool in the tool belt.
Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me, I have Kelly Kenny, our supervising county attorney, Lynn Miller, our assistant planning and zoning officer, Chris Murphy, our engineering administrator, and Aaron Karpowitz, the CEO of Arundel Community Development Services. As with the previous bill, we are supportive of expanding the types of homes that are allowable in the county and finding other solutions and additional tools in the toolbox to address housing affordability. There are just a couple small notes with this bill, and I'm happy to talk to the sponsor. I think we need to add the phrase cottage home development in one spot and insert development after another spot. Those are pretty minor amendments, I believe. And then I think, and I don't know if Aaron wants to speak to it a little more, I think there needs to just be some more parameters on the income monitoring mechanisms on the income thresholds.
Karpowitz?
Hi, thank you. Erin Karpowitz, Arundel Community Development Services. Like Ethan said, we support the concept, and I don't know if it needs to really be spelled out in the bill per se, but it does talk about monitoring. So the assumption is that there would be a monitor like ACDS as we're administering the moderately priced dwelling unit program for the county. And I think what we had shared before is that there would be administrative costs to figuring that out. We'd have to figure out the policies and procedures. And this is a little light on that compared to, say, the MPDU bill, but that could be okay with the workforce housing bill that we have that we're also administering. It leaves some room for interpretation about what the house price setting limits are. And so we could potentially work with that. But for example, in the workforce housing bill, it says that you have to make it affordable to households earning 100% of area median income. And it doesn't set a house price limit, but the MPDU bill does do that. This bill is a little bit more open, like the workforce housing bill.
And I'm certainly willing to make that clarity, I guess, and then we can set up some additional things. I know we spoke previously about a reference to it. Obviously, every single one of these, in our mind, are significantly lower than what even the MPDU housing will cost. And so we were trying to make sure that as these things are developed and or sold, they're in that 150 to 250, whatever that range. We think that this is very, working with developers that we had communicated with, who felt that it was really easy to sort of sell these in that price range based off of the construction cost. And so we thought it was going to be easier from a management standpoint to manage them. But we can provide that clarity over the next couple of weeks. I can certainly do that. Sorry about that.
I mean, my read of the bill is that it would, it would require a restrictive covenant to be placed on these properties, much like the MPDU and workforce housing. And so that to me is clear, and it's clear that there would need to be an administrator which is not defined in here, but that's what my assumption is based on the bill.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm a little confused about the unit shall be occupied by a household with an income that does not exceed 80% of median income adjusted for households. Where in the bill does it dictate the house price?
Right, so that was my point. It doesn't say what price you would set it at. For example, in the MPDU bill, we do set the price saying, the income, there's an income ceiling, so you can't have people making over 100, I'm just using MPDU, the income limits are different. So 100% AMI, but you can set the house price at 80% AMI so that you have a band of potential buyers. This one in particular, this bill, from what my read, it does not have that house price setting. And so we could write that into the policy, but it leaves it a little bit exposed.
Okay, because this doesn't set the market would decide how much the value of the house, small or otherwise.
Right. Well,
but the bill dictates that you could only sell it to somebody in a certain income band.
That's right.
Okay, so that's something that's a missing link in here.
But as Councilman Smith said, if the cost to develop it and the market, this is a lower mark, they're tinier homes, so the market is going to be so it might not be an issue, but it was an issue. It has been an issue with our workforce housing units where you have, it doesn't explicitly say in the law that we as the county can set that price at a maximum level. So it's a little bit, I think the MPDU bill is stronger, that the MPDU bill is saying you can set that price. It might be a moot point with the tiny homes because the market is going to necessarily drive developers to set it at a lower price anyway.
Okay, I think about, some of the things that we've worked on. When we build affordably in the tax credit space for a 60% AMI consumer, we still know that apartment, the construction costs are about $300,000 just to construct the unit, and that doesn't bring in all the soft costs. So now those are subsidized. So I'd be concerned that without doing something, anyways.
Right, yeah, and that's kind of my point.
Yeah, okay.
Willing to probably provide clarity. So when the MPDUs, for example, look at housing developments that have typically been constructed, they're usually looking at market rate housing. Market rate housing in Anne Arundel County, whether it's townhome, single-family home, even multi-family dwelling units, the cost to construct those are significantly higher than, let's say, a tiny home. So being able to provide that mechanism so that where the average house in Anne Arundel County is selling for about a little over $500,000, to construct those homes, you're in the ballpark of $250,000 to $300,000 for every single one of those units. Obviously, the more you build, it's a little bit cheaper. Where you're not going to spend $250,000 constructing a tiny home. You might spend $50,000, and so or $75,000. So the cost to build these are at such a level, and we've done the research, and we'll show that. Certainly, we'll send a report out where some of those provisions aren't necessary in this particular bill, because even with the market adjustments for it, the ones that we have seen here selling, certainly in this region, are in the ballpark where we think it will be affordable simply because of the cost to build them. And so that's part of the reason we weren't as concerned about setting the price point or attaching the AMI with the cost of construction because they're just not going to cost that much compared to other MPDU managed developments to build. So that was the particular reason why we were trying to keep it flexible enough where it didn't have too many constraints on it that would prohibit it from developers even taking on these types of projects. So that was the reason.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the sponsor, but also before I do that, just a quick note. When I was reviewing the bill, on page 5, line 44, I think it's a line that did not get updated with the new iteration. It still says tiny home, and I think maybe you meant to have cottage home in there, so I just wanted to point that out. But my question is, I just wanted to ask about parking. In what your rationale was choosing one spot per unit versus 1.5 or 2, or if you could just talk about your rationale behind going with that number.
Yes, so usually if you look at these developments throughout the country, most of them are occupied by single occupants. They're not designed to meet the needs of a family, for example. So you're not going to have, a married couple with 3 children living in one either loft or 1 bedroom space. It's not intentionally designed to that. So it's really focused on either those seniors that are downsizing or young people that are going into the workforce. That's who it was, and usually they have one vehicle. So we were trying to make sure that at a minimum, when these things are built, that there's at least one space per tiny home, per cottage home. It's still stuck in my head as well, so that we felt that would meet the needs. And I think if Lynn wants to weigh in on that particular, if there's any concerns for should it be a 1 point something, or is the 1 per that type of space sufficient, considering other developments that have multiple bedrooms, you obviously want 1.5 or 2 because multiple people potentially could live there. But in this case, we don't assume that a family is going to live in a cottage home.
Right. I think the parking requirement for an efficiency or a 1-bedroom apartment, say an apartment complex, is 1 space per unit. So this, I think, would maybe be comparable to that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back in 2022, when a group of stakeholders, including the county and economic development, brought Dan Parolek here to do the missing middle 3-day junket, there's definitely, the demographics show that a large percentage of residences will be occupied by single people in the coming decades. So cottage homes are certainly a good thing to try to incorporate into our housing options. We left the cottage courtyard, which is a missing middle concept, out of the Housing Attainability Act for a whole host of reasons. One of them is mostly they don't meet the threshold to require an MPDU. But there were other considerations in that we needed to spend a lot of time contemplating where cottage court communities would be located, and in keeping with the sort of missing middle context of that housing type, there was, and this may not be what this bill is trying to achieve, it just may be trying to create smaller homes, but to avoid pockets of high density in all over the county, the missing middle concept of a cottage courtyard has a couple distinctions. One, it's creating walkability, not just within the development itself, but near transit and near village town centers and mixed use areas, almost like a buffer between residential and a commercial area. You're creating where you wouldn't need 2 cars or so that does the administration have a concern about where these are, according to this bill, allowed to be placed? And it may not be the intent of the sponsor, but looking at Plan 2040 in our development policy areas, it seems to me we should be targeting certain transit corridors. I don't know. That, again, I'm just curious, because they seem to be allowed in R1 and R2, and I didn't know if y'all had, the administration or the sponsor had any thoughts about that.
So for me, if you look around the transit-oriented development, those corridors, a lot of those areas have high density, sort of R10, R15, R22, or even higher. And so at that point, you might as well build a apartment building or a more multifamily dwelling unit. And so, because on a price per square feet, you might get a better return on your value as a developer to build something that has capacity to allow more people in there. So I didn't necessarily think that the tiny homes were the solution for those specific corridors because they have such a higher density. We wouldn't want to. I would prefer to have the apartment building versus just 10 homes. And so leaving that space open for those particular types of developments just made more sense. So this didn't compete against those opportunities along those corridors. But there are pockets in that R1, R2, R5, R10 that certainly is smaller, and maybe they aren't necessarily near a transit corridor, but from a housing standpoint, they made the most sense, at least when we were doing the analysis. The second piece was, this was like, for us, it was important to create that first step, because to even get in the missing middle, or to be labeled as that, and to get an opportunity to find yourself in that pocket, in most cases, people need to graduate from the first step. And so whether that's living in an apartment building because they're 19 or 20, 21 years old, or because they're downsizing because they're 80 years old and they're retired and their income dropped to when they were like 22 years old. And so it's a significantly reduction in their income. And so for them, going back to that first step and meeting the basics of housing so that they can still live a quality life was the intent behind this. But you're right. There wasn't an intentional element to align it specifically to those transportation corridors, not saying they don't make sense. We just thought at that point, you might as well build an apartment building or a high-rise that could house even more people on that same land, giving more opportunities for housing for the missing middle, and everyone else. And so we didn't want this competing against that same inventory of spaces.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. I wasn't thinking about, well, first of all, missing middle as a concept is not about price point, it's about housing type. So when we think about this housing type, by the nature of the size, yes, it's probably going to be less expensive than a 4,500 square foot single family home. But when I guess I'm not thinking about taking, so when I drive down Veterans Highway or Crane Highway or near the hospital at BWMC, there are infill lots that are actually commercially zoned, which I can see this cottage courtyard working really well, and you're then really accessible to amenities, and rather than creating more densely populated pocket neighborhoods where we already have sprawl. So you're disconnected from anything down a peninsula or in a low residential area, and not accessible to all of those sort of things that would make both, if you're a young professional, access, closer to your workplace, or closer to restaurants and the dry cleaner, or if you're an older person, closer to your doctors and senior centers and things like that. So I wasn't necessarily thinking this would be allowed it could be allowed in a higher density residential area, but it probably wouldn't. But if you only have an acre and it's C2, creating a little cottage courtyard when you're right there near the doctor's building, half a mile down the road, that's what I was thinking. More commercial space, infill space in certain development policy areas is more the the missing middle concept. Now, again, it's not necessarily where you've taken the cottage. You know, we think of tiny homes are used also in a transitional housing situation. And again, you would want transitional housing, which would be subsidized in some way and probably managed in a nonprofit or whatever, but you would also not want to tuck those down in an R1 area
I agree.
in the county somewhere.
If
So that
there's-
it wasn't necessarily meant to say we should be looking at allowing it in R22, although you could, it probably would never get built. But C2 or C1 or mixed use, town center, village mixed use kind of sectors of the county where the walkability factor plays a role.
So I am not opposed to amendments that open it. I think for me, I was trying to make sure, well, what is the easiest path to success? Just like we were wrestling with the conversation about churches as well over the last probably year as we've been sort of diving into this topic, because they are on a variety of different zoning areas. It's really hard to contain or constrain where we look at religious locations, but I am not necessarily opposed to other commercial type. I was just trying to make sure, because I know other parts of the county where commercial, if you say just commercial, maybe it's condition-based. And I just think it needed more homework on the commercial side of the house. And so what that looked like, this could certainly be amended in the future. But I know residential people expect residential there, but on commercial, we've had a couple bills here recently where there was some friction created because people had an expectation of commercial being commercial. And so I didn't necessarily want to deep dive into that and understand where that would go. At least at this point, my goal was just to get the door open, one, to at least allow some of these projects to be created so we can see and share folks that we have examples that work and then build from there. I am not opposed to the commercial piece. I was just trying to, what is the easiest and most efficient way to success when it comes to at least getting this on the books so we can create these opportunities and then let that be the focus and effort to get other zoning categories included so we can show them, hey, this is how it's been operating. But when you say commercial, it's going to open up a whole wide range of other complexities.
Yeah, and for those folks at the table that were involved in the Housing Attainability Act work group that went on exhaustively, when we think about trying to incorporate these different housing types, I had hoped other jurisdictions have sought consultants, similar to how we did with the signage code, to bring people in, to really bring in missing middle concepts so that we would place them in the place that makes sense. So I guess I'm asking the administration, is the administration comfortable with the lower residential areas for this kind of housing as a policy? I guess that's a question.
Sure. I think we are, Councilwoman Pickard. I think the requirement in the proposed bill for the developer to provide a package of design standards that would govern it would sort of speak to what you're talking about in terms of the idea of a cottage cluster. We would use those types of packages of design standards to work with a developer to come up with something that we thought accomplishes those goals and is compatible. I do think that I can see your logic about considering this in other areas besides just the residential districts. So that's something that we could certainly talk to the sponsor about. I mean, as you all know, all of our commercial districts pretty much now allow some level of residential development as well as commercial. And I understand Mr. Smith's point. There still seems to be, even though our commercial districts have allowed residential uses for a while now, there still seems to be some level of expectation when you're talking about zoning in the public that they just envision commercial districts are going to be commercially developed, and they're not always. but I think that's okay. So that's something that we could look
Do we think, though, that allowing an acre in R1 to have 10 cottages on it is going to raise any ire with folks who expect low residential to stay low residential?
at. It could.
Okay.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to piggyback on this because I'm thinking of a very specific area in Region 4 during comprehensive rezoning where there is now a mixture of RLD and R1 that was once all RLD. And some of the R1 properties are 2 or 3 acres, but they're down a very narrow, twisty rural road. My understanding of the legislation is that in R1, you have to have a minimum of 10 units, but a minimum of 1 acre. So for example, if one of those lots that is now R1 off of that rural road that is surrounded by RLD, and it is 2.5 to 3 acres, they could subdivide that because it's permitted in R1 and have 10, 20 cottage homes. I just want to make sure, is that possible under the legislation as it's written? That if you have an R1 parcel that's 3 acres, you could subdivide it into cottage home lots and have 20 to 30 units? Okay, I think that speaks to the concern that I share because I think it creates the potential for a cottage home, rather large cottage home community in the middle of a very rural area down a very rural road. So I would be more than happy to work on addressing this because I do agree that we should have a path forward for these types of homes, but where they are located is important as well.
So there are some conditions when it comes to like sewer and water. I mean, there's some other foundational things that have to happen. So they just can't go on all R1. It has to have a specific foundational capacity to be able to allow them to be built there. So for some of those rural spaces, they would be excluded anyway because they don't have sewer and water leading to those parcels. So there are other things that might impact this as well. But like I said, I'm open to whatever you think is can help your districts be supportive. So this isn't a final sort of swipe of this. Our goal was to get the door open to show you that this thing can work. That was my goal.
And I appreciate that. So
thank you.
Yeah, I certainly want to add more options on here. And I can see this really working well on an R5 or an R10, but I have the same concerns about an R1 and an R2. We're just going through comprehensive rezoning. We've had extensive debates. We've had people that now believe that, that the zoning changes that have been made in their community are for R1, it's going to be one, and then suddenly we're going to come in and say, oh, but we're now you can put up to 10 small houses. I do think we'll get some pushback on that. I want to look into that further about how we can limit that. Because I do think that's a major change that we would have after going through all of our public, comprehensive rezoning to then come out with, oh, this is a new thing that we've thrown in there. That, what are some limitations we can put on it, to make sure that it would fit with the surrounding areas and to have that. But yes, we want to open up to have as many possibilities as possible, many options as possible, but how to make sure that it fits with the communities and what other things. So open to further discussion on that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's similar to what we've been doing with some of the other housing policies that have increased density on those same areas, even after the comprehensive rezoning has already been sort of submitted for those particular areas. This is similar in concept to the exact same thing we've done with other workforce housing or MPDU bill that have increased the density in those designated areas even before or after the comprehensive rezoning was already completed.
Ms. Pickard.
So I want to go back to the affordability aspect and the income threshold, if we could, for a minute. living in a cottage or a square, a really small square foot house is not only the potential to be an more affordable option, it's also a bit of a lifestyle choice, right? So if we think that these are going to be built in a way that are affordable, is there a need to put an 80% AMI on the household person?
Is that question for me?
It's a question for
Yeah,
either of
So-
you.
I know, well, I'll let you go first.
Oh, I was going to say, yes. I think when you look at who is impacted the most by housing options and choices, those who are in that 80K-ish range or less are the ones that are finding it the most hardest or the most challenging to find affordable housing. And so if you just open this up to anybody, you can certainly get, if you make $200,000, $150,000, $200,000, $300,000, you don't have, in my mind, that much of a challenge finding housing options because your salary is in a range that allows you to open up these different. But if you're the teacher, the firefighter that's just doing, or the police officer who just got one income, you are 100% have a challenge trying to find housing here. And so creating that space for them is the intent behind this bill. So that just like we did with the MPUs, we said that people who made this income range, we wanted to make sure they had options, and we carved out a specific salary range as far as income to do that. And so this is similar because if we didn't put restrictions on this, you would certainly have developers or wealthy people just buying them up and potentially either renting them out, which is why we focused on the rental piece of it. But it wasn't going to be like short-term rentals. We wanted long-term folks in there for whoever. Because we did understand that at some point, if you bought this, you may transition out of that phase. Maybe you get married and you have multiple children. Well, that cottage home is not sufficient for that. But you don't want to sell your cottage home, and so now you rent it out. But we wanted to make sure it wasn't like creating like Airbnb sort of situations. We wanted communities to be there and existing there, and so that was the intent, is specifically to help the folks in that salary range, who we all know have the hardest challenge finding affordable options.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that there were discussions about whether to put income restrictions on it, and Councilman Smith talked to a lot of advocates, housing advocates, who really pushed for that aspect of it. I consider myself a housing advocate. On the other hand, we're being tasked with administering this, and it is a big, heavy lift administratively, which is why there is a fiscal note with this. And I'm not sure how many developments this is going to produce, because there is the requirement that it be on public water and sewer as it should be. And so I'm not sure, how heavy of a lift it is going to be in balance with how many units are produced and what that's going to be. But I do know that there were housing advocates that really advocated for that, so that they don't get bought up by investors, so that there can be an assurance that there is an affordability component.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just see housing first policies across the country that really use and utilize a tiny home scenario in a transitional housing concept, which is highly subsidized. So that's one way. And then you have your sort of niche, someone who's bought the tiny home and they've decided to live in this sort of modest, less things. I have too many pairs of shoes to live in a tiny home. So whether, it doesn't matter what my income is. So it's a lifestyle choice for some, especially maybe at that early, and a young professional, someone just getting into home ownership, right? So there's that. And then when we look at the missing middle concept of creating a cottage courtyard community, where you're creating a community in an infill situation that's leans more towards a downsizing senior, but could be a young professional. There's just lots of ways that this sort of housing choice plays out. But the fact that this is permitting this concept just in low residential, I'm just stuck on that a little bit. I'm just stuck on how that all plays out. I don't know.
I don't know if it's...
I don't know. There's just lots of different conflating a lot of different things in this one bill.
I think it's a simple bill. It's just saying folks who don't have a lot of shoes or who don't have a lot of options in the world to be able to afford and create home ownership opportunities for those folks that live out there. That I got at least 4 or 5 that are emailed me and saying that they've lost, they're getting evicted from their place because they can't afford it, and they really want to be able to buy something. And so I think the policies that we make as a county to create these, the more we create these options for that lower class income salaries, the better we off as a county in general, because it's super important that they understand that this community and this county is looking at their efforts and their well-being as well, because they're the ones that make this county what it is. They are the servers at a restaurant. They are the teachers who are in the classroom, the police officers. They're working 2 or 3 shifts just to be able to live in this county. We don't want that. And so these entities will create modest, functioning spaces where they can still have a good quality of life, but not spend 40% or 60% of their paycheck to just live in the county that they serve. And so I think for us, it's just a matter of where do we want to go as a county. And this is if you look at these things being built throughout the country, they are really making significant life changes and impacts to those folks that are on that lower spectrum of the income, which is why I think we should follow suit. And let's be real, you can build a tiny home if you have R1, and you want to build a house, you can go build a tiny home right now. There's no law saying you can't build one. This is just creating that density level and creating conditions where they should go, so that you get that economic impact on the developer building it, so they're not spending wasting a lot of money on housing that won't give them a significant high value of return. And so this is just a policy decision that opens up another door for people who don't make a lot of money. And so I think it's a very simple bill, and it certainly, if you have things you want to add to it, I am not opposed to amendments that safeguard some of the spaces that you may be concerned about. Let's have that discussion. But I just want to get the door open to show you all that as a county, we can do this too, to ensure that our citizens here that work here, live here, have the opportunity to live well and thrive, and not live paycheck to paycheck and paying most of their income on rent or mortgage.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to make sure I'm clear, these would not be subject to school APF, like efficiencies are not subject to school APF, or am I wrong in that assumption?
So I think they still are, but because of how they're constructed, they're going to be very minimal school impacts and I'll let the expert, before I say something out of my incorrectly.
Yeah, I think you're correct. It's not exempt from APF, but I think when public schools does their student generation calculations, an efficiency department doesn't generate any students. So for the school APF test, it probably would not be an issue, but it would still have to meet water, sewer, transportation APF tests.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Staff? All right, thank you very much. Next up, Bill number 9325, Dog Daycare and Training Facilities. Ms. Pickard and Ms. Fiedler. Who's going to talk on dog daycare?
It's a pretty simple bill. But we do have, I know the administration has reviewed and has some concerns, but this is adding some uses to the code. Pet care business, pet care facility. I'm still in my tiny home conversation. So we have, let me look at where I am. Dog training facilities as permitted uses. Dog training facilities in C1, C2, C3, and C4 is being added, designating, because we have a use code that is so detailed, we have to distinguish between dog training facilities and dog daycare and dog grooming, and it's a little annoying, but adding this to the W1, W2, where you can already have a dog grooming parlor or a doggy daycare facility, that's basically just adding it to places where you can already do this stuff.
Yes, and I would just add that it was brought to our attention, the RA and RLD areas, that there's existing code language that actually came from a bill I did years ago. So we will be addressing that through an amendment so that there is not any confusion. But if you do look at the use chart, there are already dog and or pet uses that are permitted or conditional in these commercial zones, permitted in the bill. It's just adding another use. I don't know why at one point we excluded it, or maybe we've just gotten more detailed over the years, but dog training is by far the majority is obedience. So you have a owner there with the dog most of the time, or 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 training ratio. Pet owners want responsible, they want responsible dogs. They want obedient dogs. And I think it just helps to make for a successful pet ownership experience.
Administration. do you have any
Thank you, Madam
comments?
Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. I have Lynn Miller, our Assistant Planning and Zoning Officer, and Kelly Kenny, our Assistant County Attorney. Yes, we did have a brief conversation. I appreciate that. There is a little quirk because in the RA and RLD districts, dog training facility or kennels are, I believe, conditional uses, correct? They're special exception use, and this is adding the training at a facility as a permitted use. So there's some incongruency there where you're having a permitted use in a special exception use.
Well,
So
wouldn't, if you can't have if you've gotten your special exception to have a kennel and you're adding dog training, you'd need to go through another special exception to add dog training? Is that what we're saying?
No, that wouldn't be the case. The way that a commercial kennel is defined in the code now includes dog training. So dog training is already allowed as part of a commercial kennel. I believe what Mr. Hunt was pointing out, that kennels in the 2 lower residential districts are special exception uses, which we think they probably should be. Like, the conditions should probably stay in place, because kennels are one of those uses that they tend to generate complaints in residential districts, and we deal with that a lot. So I almost think that what you've added, the section that you've added for the residential districts, could, unless there's something I'm missing, that could potentially just come out, because training's already allowed in those districts, and it falls under the kennel use, but it does need that special exception requirement. So, unless you're trying to eliminate the special exception process, you probably don't need to do anything with regard.
I think the goal is to distinguish a dog training facility as not a kennel. They're not keeping dogs overnight. A dog training facility is a place you would go just for dog training, and they wouldn't be kept overnight. So that eliminates the special exception need, because it's not a kennel. So that's why there's a distinguishment. You could have a kennel that also has dog training, but this was adding a dog training facility, which is not a kennel. Have I lost?
No, I understand it. Actually, the way that kennel is defined, you don't actually have to have boarding. It could just be a training facility, but it is a special exception use.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These animal bills get so complicated.
Oh, no, you can just take over. Animal bells.
Yeah.
So yes, dog training facilities are distinguished separately in the bill, specifically in the commercial districts. But in the RA and RLD in the bill, I do see what you're saying, because of the previously passed legislation that expanded the definition of commercial kennels to add training as one of the things that can take place in a commercial kennel, with a special exception being required for RA and RLD. So I think we could remove that section from the bill and keep the intent of the legislation, which is to allow dog training facilities in the commercial zones. Because they're different environments. Commercial is different than RA and RLD. And the special exception for at least the reason that I introduced my original bill is special exception because of the feedback from surrounding residents in the area of the commercial kennel. They just had concerns. So I would, yes, Lynn, I agree with you.
There's another approach you could take, and in the Article 18 update that we've been working on, we have right now proposed a definition for daycare facilities, dog daycare, we're calling them pet daycare facilities. And we weren't really changing the way the use was allowed, but it's just because the use isn't defined in the code right now, and that sometimes leads to confusion and questions. So we have a definition drafted that does include training. So we could pull that out of the proposed Article 18 bill. You could put that in this bill if you wanted to do it that way. So in other words, instead of having to add dog training as its own standalone use, it would just be covered under daycare facilities, and you could add that definition. And then I think you would still, it looks like you're adding it in some new districts like C2 and W1. So you could still just keep those use charts added to those districts, but with a definition. That's just a different approach if you want to not have so many separate uses like dog daycare, dog training, all these, like you said, it does get to be a bit much. So that's a way you could lump it in with dog daycare if you want to do it that way.
But still keep special exception for
the
RA and
residential
RLD.
districts.
I think that may work, but we'll just have to go back and make sure.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Unintention.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Just for clarification, I had a conversation with some folks that did have training take place and the pets were kept overnight. Is that still a distinguishable, that they were boarded when they were getting that training? Because we were talking about this legislation specifically about, because they've been driving to Virginia and some in PA to go do this training. And I'm like, good God, why do we not have closer options? So I'm not saying that, I'm actually going to ask if I can co-sponsor it as well, to put that on the record. But just to clarify something that was earlier, you can have a training facility that does board animals while they're being trained. Am I incorrect on that?
Yes, and we
Okay.
would consider that. If they're being boarded overnight, we would consider that a kennel. But we also, in application of the code, we have internally interpreted dog daycare as also allowing training. That's part of the reason we wanted to add a definition to make that clear, because it's not defined. But in application of the code, we have allowed a dog daycare business to include training. And just one more thing for your awareness, I wanted to point out, in the definition that we were planning to add, we also had included a clause that training could not include training of canine dogs, because we consider that canine dog training should be occurring at a police facility because they're police dogs. And this sort of...
Yeah, I was confused there for a second.
Sorry, K9. Thank you. This arose out of a case that came about a couple years ago where there was just a private residential property, and the property owner was allowing, I think it was a police unit from another jurisdiction, had sort of set up a business where they were doing their attack dog training on this residential property, and it turned into a really, I think, stressful situation for the neighboring properties because you have these fairly aggressive dogs out in the yard. And so we thought that we should address that, and so in this definition that we came up with daycare, it says that that can allow training, but not training of attack dogs or canine dogs.
I think personal, oh, go ahead.
I was just say, appreciate that. It's definitely a smart bill by the sponsor because we need to do, or at least have those options closer to home. So yes, but definitely willing to co-sponsor if put that on record. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I think it's okay to distinguish between the types of training happening. I would probably use something more clarifying than canine. I would assume that the administration would probably be open to that because I had the same reaction, well, aren't all dogs canines? Maybe something like law enforcement training or something that further describes exactly what we are not allowing so that it's clear.
Any other comments, administration? All right. Moving on to bill number 9425, Public Works, Utilities, Right-of-Way Infrastructure Maintenance Fee.
While they're getting set up, Madam Chair, so I have Chris Murphy, our engineering administrator, and Aaron Day, our assistant director from the Department of Public Works, and Kelly Kenny, our supervising county attorney. We do just have a brief slide presentation. It's 6 or 7 slides, but really just 5. But so this, so this bill is in response to some federal requirements that the county is required to meet regarding lead in the water system. There are a number of homes, so take a step back, Anne Arundel County outlawed lead pipes in 1937. There are a number of homes that were built obviously before that where we need to do an inventory of the water pipes connecting to our public water system. And so I will turn it over to Erin if she wants to go through her presentation briefly and just give you a bit more background.
Thank you. Yes, Erin Day, Assistant Director, Department of Public Works, and I will keep it brief. We would like to add some context to Bill 9425 because we believe that it will provide the most effective way of meeting EPA's lead and copper rules. So the Environmental Protection Agency's lead and copper rule requires that all public water utilities with more than 3,000 customers abide and comply with the lead service line replacement program. It's an amendment to the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and it's the first time that we've ever been responsible for maintaining a portion of the service lines on private property. So our current code restricts the use of utility funds that are collected through the environmental protection fee to only work on public infrastructure. So we cannot fully comply with these new EPA regulations until this funding restriction is addressed. In addition to removing the funding obstacles, we would also like to prioritize the speed and systematic coordination to addressing these pipe inspections and replacements. We have 2 examples of cities that took vastly different approaches to this program, which we're drawing from those experiences. In one instance, you had Flint, Michigan, which you may have heard of because they were the topic of national headlines for their poor mismanagement of this lead pipes. They had hundreds of homeowners initially decline free lead pipe replacement due to distrust and leaving lead lines in the ground even after they had declared the program complete. In Flint, the funds were initially directed toward homes with known lead pipes, which meant that workers couldn't tackle neighborhoods systematically. And the city was ultimately forced to adopt an ordinance so that homeowners couldn't opt out to finish the work. Alternatively, we have Newark, New Jersey, across the river with a similar lead pipe situation, and they responded more proactively. They successfully tackled its lead crisis by prioritizing the speed and mandatory participation. Under the initial lead service line replacement contract of early 2019, they had less than 3% of Newark residents participate in the program. By September of 2019, Newark passed ordinances to make the program free and mandatory to all residents. They removing that financial barrier and opening the program to the entire city ensured the equitable program. And the field teams went from replacing 10 to 15 lines per day to over 100 lines per day. And on February 11th, 2022, they declared their city lead-free, and the project was completed. So through these examples, we can see that the mandatory ordinance prevents delays, and as we know, prolonged projects erode public trust and allow for lapses in the management and record keeping for this type of a program. So the mandatory ordinance ensures that 100% replacement for public health protection. It enables a systematic coordination, which we can go block by block to be more efficient in a successful implementation. Good news is we are not in the same situation as either Flint, Michigan or Newark, New Jersey, where as of today, we've not found evidence of lead in Anne Arundel County infrastructure, largely due to the building code that Mr. Hunt mentioned. In 1936, we outlawed lead pipe lines in Anne Arundel County. So our service line investigation replacement is focused solely on residential structures that were built prior to 1937. So the first thing we need to do is complete our inventory of the public or private service lines. And so the EPA requires that to be completed by November of 2027. So of the 130,000 properties that we service with public water, only 8,000 have unknown pipe materials. So our efforts are to focus on those 8,000 and identify the private pipe materials. And we started that a few years ago, first by narrowing it down to those 8,000 by looking at the date that the buildings were built, and then looking at any plumbing permits or other permits that were associated with those buildings to see if they had undergone service line replacement. After narrowing it down, we've worked on a pretty extensive campaign, a public communication campaign. We've built a website and we have all of the private service line inventory publicly available for people to assess. And just last month, we mailed approximately 6,900 letters to those property owners with unknown pipe materials. And that will be the fourth letter that those property owners have received from us. We've sent letters, postcards. And so in this material, we're providing instructions for them to test their own pipes and hopefully self-report so that we can whittle away at that inventory. But we do believe we've exhausted their either willingness or their ability to test the pipe material themselves. And so it's now our task to go out and perform these inspections on their behalf. So the work to complete these investigations and then move into the replacement phase is already programmed into our capital improvement program. We just need to address the funding obstacles associated with the utility fund. So to complete the investigation phase, we've identified a process called potholing. It's our preferred method of looking at the pipe materials. It will involve digging a 12-inch by 12-inch hole to reveal the exterior of the water service line to identify the type of material. And the whole process takes approximately 3 to 4 hours. We will combine the results from those potholes with predictive modeling to try to limit the number of properties we actually have to physically investigate. Once we get a full inventory, then we can go through a systematic approach to replacing the necessary water service lines. A service line replacement is actually a pretty common activity. It takes, on average, about a day to complete, and the property owner will be out of water for approximately 4 to 8 hours. And so during the service line investigations and replacements, it'll be our goal to minimize any impacts to the residents and then restore the area by filling in the holes, leveling the disturbed yard, planting seeds, replacing sidewalks and pavement. So this legislation uses an existing revenue source, the environmental protection fee, while also renaming it to the infrastructure maintenance fee because we think it makes more sense, is more indicative of what we use the funding for. And then clarify and expand the allowable uses of this fee to ensure that the existing funds can pay for our existing obligations without raising taxes or creating a new fee. So the lead copper service line replacement program is not optional, it's legally mandatory. This legislation directly addresses the EPA's revised lead and copper rule and allows us to meet a federal deadline. And passing this legislation ensures safe drinking water for our residents and protects the county from federal penalties for noncompliance. This bill also provides an opportunity to rename the existing fee from environmental protection fee to the infrastructure maintenance fee, so it's more indicative of the work performed, as I just mentioned. And we believe that this is the key to success for this multi-year federal mandate, and it provides two critical tools: the funding and the access to complete public health projects seamlessly and on schedule.
So thank you for this good explanation, and I also want to thank our legislative analyst, Kate Ganley, who gave us some very detailed information on this that really helped to understand this process. So back on my school board days, we had a state mandate to test all the school system water sources for lead, and I was supportive of that, but I always said that a weakness is that our kids are spending more time at home than they are in the school system. So while we can fix it at the school system, they're being exposed to much more. What are we doing to actually test and make sure that especially in our older neighborhoods, that they're safe? So I'm glad to see that we're doing this. We're continuing on with this because it is a big issue. We need to do that. Is there, and if y'all would just clarify publicly, y'all are already doing great outreach to these houses. If the houses do not respond, what mechanism can the county then go in to proactively move if there's not a response from the homeowners?
So that is the intent of this bill, is that we would be able to replace those lines.
Without their written, we would be able to access their property and go on to replace the lines without.
Correct.
Just want to clarify for people so that they know that would be coming, but this is for the benefit of everyone.
That's
to have this done. We do not want a Flint, Michigan situation in Anne Arundel County. That's for sure. So, yes, Ms. Pickard.
So the number of unknown pipes in District 1 is a lot larger. Is that a certain community we're talking about, or just the more densely populated, or the age of the community? Like, it's pretty.
I think it's the densely populated, the density of the structures as well as the year that they were built is what would make District 1 a higher.
So is this some of our neighborhoods closer to the Baltimore City? Is that
correct?
Okay, thank you.
And y'all have already begun this process, correct? Y'all have already been going in and.
We haven't replaced any of the private service lines yet. The investigation has been ongoing for over 2 years. With record research and, community outreach.
But no actual replacement at this time?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. All right. Mr. Smith.
I was going to say, if you can coordinate with my office just so we can help with that communication piece of it, because when I first heard of, I didn't know the number until just now, actually. I knew it was high, I just didn't know it was that high compared to other districts. But we certainly want to be collaborative in helping sort of communicate that to all the, I've been going around all these HOAs, and this is certainly one of the things I'm going to sort of speak to them about to ensure that they're participating in this process so we can remediate it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And if we can perform the testing without the pothole excavation that I'd mentioned, it's more efficient, cheaper, it's less disruptive. So if we can work with the property owners, that would be the preference.
Sure.
It may look as an alarming number. I should also mention that of the 8,000 unknowns, we suspect, based on statistics, that it'll be closer to 1,000 that will actually need to have a service line replacement.
So that means using that same methodology, in District 7, 186, probably 17 that needs it, or some reduced number than 186.
Correct. Yeah, we don't have.
Which means it's still significantly higher than the other districts. But I just want to get all hands on deck when it comes to the HOAs that we are that we communicate with to really push this at their meeting. And say, listen, you need to reach out to the county and help coordinate when they can come into those neighborhoods and speak with these homeowners, and so we can get this resolved as quickly as possible. So I just want to be a resource to you in amplifying this and ensuring that they're responsive to DPW.
I just wanted to weigh in. The test that the homeowner has to do is actually very simple.
Yeah.
They just have to basically rub it with a coin and take a picture for it and hit it with a magnet.
Oh.
We can figure out what kind of material it is.
Good.
Oh.
So,
Apparently not pennies, because
So-
pennies are being phased out, right?
it's not very difficult. They can scratch it and then can see if it's lead, or they can put a magnet on it both ways and then take a picture, fill out the survey for us, and we're done.
Oh, that's great, because I think probably some people don't sign because they're afraid you're going to come dig up their front yard or something like that.
It's possible, and, or they can't access the pipe, so it would be the service line coming into their home, which in most cases would be in the basement. It could be in a crawl space, depending on the layout of the home. So
Sure.
I believe most of the issues are either misunderstanding or inability
And
to access the
accessibility.
pipe. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah.
you. This was definitely valuable information.
Good project. So,
Great.
Any further questions? Thank you all. All right. Next is Bill 9525, payment in lieu of taxes, Little Patuxent Family in Gambrills. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have Kelly Kenny, our supervising county attorney, Aaron Karpowitz, our CEO of Arundel Community Development Services, and Brian Schenk, our financial services manager from the Office of Finance. So this Bill 9525 would approve a payment in lieu of taxes or pilot for Little Patuxent Family, which I believe is in District 4. It is a proposed 33-unit family apartment community adjacent to the Waugh Chapel Town Center and Little Patuxent Senior, which is a recently completed 78-unit senior apartment community. It will have, the project will be one 4-story elevator building with surface and podiums and covered parking spaces. And the apartments in it will be set for a range of individuals and families with incomes ranging from 30 to 80% of area median income. 8 units will be available to households with incomes 30% and below of AMI, 17 units for households with incomes at 60% and below AMI, and 8 units available to households at 80% and below AMI. It'll be financed using 4% LIHTC tax exempt bonds, 4% low LIHTC credits, tax exempt bonds, state loan funds, and a sponsor loan and a loan from ACDS. Happy to answer any questions or if Aaron wants to add any additional information.
This is a great project. If you're not sure where it is, it's on Route 3 where the Slim Chickens is. It's right there by there. And the senior building is fully occupied, correct, Ms. Karpowitz?
I think there might be a couple units that they're still getting folks certified through the project-based voucher program, but it's mostly, yes.
It's done. So this just increases that community to now have ones that are family oriented. So,
That's right.
so all right. I think there's any questions. Anything else? Thank you very much. That was an easy one.
Thank you.
Next is Bill 9625, Public Safety Officer Property Tax Credit, Mr. Smith and Ms. Ledbetter. This is your bill.
I think the intent behind this, when this bill was first, or this process was first enacted some 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be one of those early adopters in implementing this program back in like 2015. And at the time, it was I think 5-year sort of measure that we were looking at, and it was aimed at trying to help with recruiting. And because we didn't have a policy like this in place, a few years later, that was extended. I think either 7 or 10 years, it was extended to that extension. And what we found over the years is this has been a highly sought-after asset or capability for the public safety personnel that are utilizing this resource. And they have started to near the end of some of that for those who were early adopters in that process. And for me, this shouldn't just be this should also be a retention effort when it comes to supporting our public safety folks that are working for this county. And so the goal was to implement something that was going to be leveraged for the entirety of their career to keep them here. I know we couldn't do something that said forever. I think Office of Law has certainly spoken to us and about other bills about doing something that was indefinite. We weren't 100% sure on where that, line was going to be. And so we certainly wanted to test that through. We thought if the average person that's working for our public safety is spending 25 years, they should be able to benefit from this the entire time there's in that capacity, just like as a active duty military person who receives BAH. They don't, at 5 years or 10 years, the government or the military doesn't say, well, you know what, you're not going to get BAH anymore. We just want to use that to get you in the hook. So we've always taken care of our military in this same capacity. And I've always envisioned that as a BAH equivalent to some extent, or at least a tool that they can use. And so for me, I felt comfortable trying to extend this so that we can ensure all of our public safety employees are benefiting from this, and we retain the most qualified ones, as well as encourage them to come to Anne Arundel County, because here they'll be able to live a quality life that is much harder in other jurisdictions. And so I was a fan of trying to extend this to the life of their employment. Until they retire, which is most of them who do retire will more than likely spend that around 25 years working for the county. And so with that, I'll certainly turn it over to my co-sponsor here, but I'm a fan of this and hope the council sees the value in it.
I echo much of what Mr. Smith just said. To me, this is a very powerful retention tool, and it begs the question, why wouldn't we want to continue to incentivize and keep. These are officers that we have put significant investment into their training, and why wouldn't we want to incentivize them to continue to remain a police officer on our force in Anne Arundel County for as long as possible? 25 years, again, just speaks to the, probably most likely retirement date if someone were to make it a lifetime career. This to me is just, it's common sense.
I certainly agree with all the sentiments of my colleagues. My one thing is when we come to any credit like this, 25 years is a long time not to revisit something. I think everything needs to be revisited in a certain, occasionally to see how it's working, what's going on there. So I'd be interested perhaps in an amendment that would add a review period, at X, every. Or do we already have something that every few years we look at this to see what the fiscal impact is on the county and how many people are using it? Do we have that automatically, or can we add something like that to see?
I think, if I may, the years is tied to the years of service, not years from today. Does that make sense?
So they don't have to reapply. So right now they can only use it for 10 years.
Right.
And now this would be 25.
Exactly.
But I still would like to see, because that's going to open it up to a lot more people to use it for longer.
To use it for longer.
Longer. And just to periodically that we look at the fiscal impact of how many people are using it. What is the fiscal cost to the county? Does that make sense? So, if we suddenly have, people can only use it for 10 years and we suddenly have, a huge number that now can use it for 15 more,
I think maybe what you're asking for is, I think I understand what you're saying, but maybe a more applicable way of looking at that would be, is it having the desired effect? So, because we're not saying 25, it's not that we're not going to, any council at any point in time, next year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, could come in and introduce a bill to change and say, now an officer can get it for 30 years of their career, or now they're only going to get it for 17 years of their career. That would always be an option. But if you were maybe more interested in seeing, is this actually getting us the retention results that we're looking for? I think that makes a little bit more sense than... Because it's not 25 years from today.
Right,
it's every single officer's going to have a different ending date because every single officer starts on a different date.
Right. No, I'm right. I don't think I'm explaining it accurately for me. It's like, what is the fiscal impact today? And then if we extend more officers will be eligible to use it for longer moving forward. So what, in 3 years, say we take a look at how many more officers have utilized this, because this is a credit that they have to apply for, correct?
That is correct. Brian Shank, Financial Services Manager, Office of Finance. Right now, the existing tax credit program applies to active members of our professional staff, so professional firefighters, professional police officers. It also applies to retirees, so it does apply to individuals who have retired from county service. It also applies to volunteer members of fire companies. So essentially, every year, the group of people do have to apply. The Office of Finance does verify for individuals who are employed by the county that they are employed by the county, so we check in with personnel. Same with retirees. For volunteer fire companies, they have to meet their low step credit hours. So every year, the person would still have to reapply year after year. As of fiscal 26, the most current year, there's about 1,200 to 1,300 people receiving this tax credit. I believe the total tax credit that was given out was about $3 million, $3.5 million. Now, that is, and I won't speak to the budget process, but the budget office, when they're doing the budget and the tax rate, they consider how that is spread out to the entire population of all property owners. So there's every the property owner then takes on a little bit of that versus the people who receive the credit. But right now, it's about 1,200 to 1,300 people who are receiving the credit from that entire population.
And they are limited to taking this credit for 10 years?
Currently, yes. I think the people who received it the longest are currently at 8 years. So coming up on the next fiscal year would be their year 9. So no one's at the 10-year mark right now just because of how the credit worked out. So we're not at the point where people are potentially not going to receive it because they've hit that 10-year cap.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is that once we have the people that meet the 10-year cap, you know, when we get to year 12, 13 or whatever, are we going to see a large increase of people who still can access this funds? Because right now at the 10-year, we're going to have some people roll off. So perhaps the tax credit is staying, the fiscal impact is staying fairly steady, you know, will be once they get to 10 years. And it's kind of, I'm not opposing that. I'm just saying, is there a mechanism for us to monitor it and see how it's being used? And when you do the breakdown, can you all see the breakdown there when you give the credit for who applies, how many are active duty, and so that we can see, you know, how much of it is a retention, you know, a real benefit that our active duty people are using?
Because we have 3 different applications, essentially. We have an application for volunteers, we have an application for people who are actively working, and then for retirees. Office of Finance can certainly do a stratification that shows how many people in each of those 3 categories is essentially receiving it. That's something that we've already been doing since I think the most recent adaptation, which was to include retirees. So we now we already have a simple stratification, but more than happy to provide that every year or periodically as
I'd be curious to see that. I'm just, you know, I'm curious how many of our folks are taking advantage of this credit.
Sure. I'm more than happy to have the tax personnel pull that together and share that with all.
Thank you. Ms. Rodman.
Thank you. I'm looking at the fiscal note right now, and as you mentioned, it looks like the annual cost is about $3.35 million. And I'm curious, would it not be possible to estimate the cost? You know, say once there are people, you know, once we have reached a year in the future where folks beyond the current 10-year limit would be, you know, eligible to continue. As my colleague mentioned, you know, you would have people kind of rolling off because they've hit their 10 years and then they're going to, you know, go back into sort of the regular, you know, sort of the regular amount of their tax burden. Is there a way that we could get an estimate of what this would cost, say, you know, once we hit year 11 and then maybe year 16, when we start to have a significant number of additional individuals in that, you know, qualifying for the program, because it should grow over time, right? Am I calculating it? That number should grow. And so I guess that's my concern. And I'm also, we have, you know, our police have a bargaining unit where they negotiate their, you know, they negotiate their compensation with the county. And I feel like we're, you know, just kind of adding something pretty significant, not to every single officer, but this is a, you know, a significant boost. And, you know, I feel like that maybe should be part of that conversation when I think, especially I would be curious, I'm rather sure that our retirees have very generous retirement compensation. And so I'm curious, is this really necessary?
I think there's a few different questions there, and some of it probably Office of Personnel. Yeah, I think Office of Personnel might have to weigh in on how many individuals are close to retirement. I think when I thought this through, seeing the legislation as proposed, the growth path that I saw was that individuals who retire and remain and otherwise still receive that tax credit, there's going to be someone who's brought in to replace it. So the growth would probably be achieved naturally through that process, where an individual retires, continues to receive the tax credit as a retiree, and their replacement comes in and could receive it. So essentially, that would be the kind of growth path that might occur for this particular tax credit is new hires might start receiving it to replace a retiree, and then the new hire and the retiree would both be receiving the tax credit at the same time. So there would be potentially some growth. To the extent that that's something I could put together, I think Office of Personnel would have to weigh in a little bit more and say how many officers who are county residents are close to retirement, whether that's 20 years, 25 years, whatever that number happens to be.
That information from the administration, because I don't know, obviously I can't even do like a back of an envelope sort of calculation or back of a napkin calculation with the information. I don't have enough information to figure that out. And, I know that, not every single group, I mean, the volunteers are in a different category, I think, but, we've had some very generous compensation increases to the groups impacted here. And so I'm just curious really how necessary this is and if this should be part of the bargaining process.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Administration? All right. Thank you very much. Next is resolution number 3425, a resolution for advanced land acquisition. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So joining me at the table, I have Chris Trumbauer, our budget officer, Christine Eater, our senior assistant county attorney, Jeff Hagan, who's the director of planning, design, and construction for the Board of Education, Chris Daniels, our real estate manager, and I believe Eric Michelson was here. Can't see if he's further down the table or not. But so this resolution was held at the last council meeting. And I know we wanted to bring it back to discuss it a little more. If you'll recall, it was held at the last council meeting because we were awaiting on a phase 2 environmental assessment to be completed. We were hoping to have that completed and back to us by the end of last week. However, we were informed Friday afternoon that the results are still at the lab, I believe. And so we're now the expected turnaround is about 10 days from today. So we're happy to answer any further questions about the legislation. If anyone has any, I think, coming up at the next council meeting, we'll need to make a decision as to whether we split the two parcels out via an amendment or continue to hold the resolution until that phase 2 is back and completed and we have that information available. We will also need to amend the contracts for purchase because they initially had closing dates that were by the end of this year. Obviously, these will not close by the end of this year as we have held the resolution pending the phase 2. So we will have revised contracts of sale. We're working with our broker to get those revised dates agreed to.
So that was my question is because as the council had many questions about the environmental impact on the Shipley's property, but I don't think they're the same type of questions on the Glebe property, and we certainly don't want to jeopardize that possible acquisition. So would it, since the Shipley's may be still delayed as we wait on information, would it be beneficial to split these two out so that we could move ahead on the Glebe Road, the Glebe property?
I'm not sure if anyone else at the table has thoughts. I think the Glebe property, I think we're the only potential purchaser. I'm not concerned about that one. The administration's not concerned about that parcel moving forward. I think the Shipley one is, we're a little more concerned about the broker or the seller potentially accepting another offer if we delay the process too much.
Right.
I think logistically it might be easier to continue to hold them, but we're certainly open to an amendment to split them out as well if that's the preference of the council.
I mean, I would think that y'all would know best on that one. I mean, but I don't, as they're both on there, I would not want to jeopardize one because of delays on the other. And I hope that the landowner is understanding of the fact that we are just waiting, on further test results beforehand, that we're still interested, but we've got to make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. So, Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in addition to this, obviously the two properties are tied together in this resolution, but there's an appropriations bill as well that I know we held at the last council meeting. Unfortunately, in that appropriations bill, there is also an appropriation for SCB, I always mess up the acronym, Special Community Taxing District, that I know they are very anxious. They have things that they want to do. So suggestions on how, because these are somewhat, not necessarily tied together, but they are linked. Any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to take that.
Thank you.
Chris Tremmeyer, Budget Officer. Thanks for the question, Council Member. What I would encourage the council to do, regardless of whether you delay or amend out the Shipley property from this resolution before you now, the council can pass the appropriation bill as is. And we will, let me explain what that would do. The appropriation bill takes $1.1 million from the CEO contingency fund, and it puts that over in finance non-departmental. That's the vehicle to get the funding over to the capital budget, which we had originally requested for in order to facilitate we need more funding for Shipley, right? We can still put that money in finance non-departmental, but it won't go anywhere until and unless you all approve by resolution the purchase of that Shipley property. So that money, for all intents and purposes, will be there unspent until we legislatively move it or spend it again. It, for all intents and purposes, is the same as if it was left in CAO. We could still spend it on, for instance, snow removal at a later date. We would need to bring legislation down for you. So what I'm saying is it's a no risk proposition for the council. You can go ahead and pass the appropriation bill. We will say at the table and commit through legislative intent, we won't touch that money. And in fact, we can't spend that money on Shipley, or we can't send it over to the capital budget until and unless you all approve by resolution that acquisition. So I appreciate and share your concerns of not wanting to delay the other two appropriations in that bill. And I'm telling you, you all can go ahead and pass that bill if you don't have concerns with those other two aspects. And then we will work on what happens with Shipley subsequently.
So essentially, passing the appropriations bill is not permission to spend the money on Shipley.
Correct. It's the precursor to be able to do that. And so, I mean, I think we all at the table hope that we eventually get to a place where the council approves Shipley. And then at that point, we will send that money over to the capital budget in advanced land project in order to pay for it. If ultimately that does not happen, that money sits in finance non-departmental, and my presumption is at a later date in the next calendar year, we will then bring something forward to you to reappropriate that over to, I'm going to presume, snow removal, especially seeing the weather pattern shaping up, right? But you all have the final legislative authority on appropriation, so that money won't go anywhere until you approve where it goes. It can't do anything in finance non-departmental. That's a parking spot, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification, because I do think it's important that, I mean, the community that has been trying to obtain these funds for quite some time, they've gone through a lot of effort to do so, and I hate to see, their hard work continue to be kind of unintentionally certainly unintentionally, but I think they feel at the moment that they're being a little bit held hostage. So it would be great to be able to make.
Yeah, I've gotten the emails too. And so if I may, since I'm on the mic and you guys were kind of openly questioning whether the best course is to delay the resolution again until we get the EIS or amend it out, the question I would ask, if I was you, to our real estate manager is there an urgency to make that offer and get that contract signed for Shipley? Because the real practical implication of hold versus amend out, you can amend the resolution and you can vote on it and you can take care of Glebe immediately. That means we'd have to bring a new resolution and it would have to go through the process for Shipley. That takes essentially one more cycle than it would if you just held it. So I'm not telling you what to do, but that's what I would ask Chris. Do we need to move on Shipley with urgency? Or maybe the school system has thoughts on that.
That makes sense. All right. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Ledbetter?
And do we feel confident, Glebe, well, do you think we need to move with urgency on Shipley? Number one, I'll take the advice. Thank you. And then the part B would be, I know Mr. Hunt did say you feel confident Glebe isn't going anywhere. They understand what the holdup is. Just to confirm both of those things would be helpful.
Yeah, Chris Daniels, real estate manager. I do think we need to move rather quickly on Shipley. My sense is when the broker talks to the owner, it could go 50-50, whether they agree to amend the contract and push the closing date out past the current date, or they just say no and go with another offer. I realistically think they might give us probably push to get the closing date extended to sometime in February possibly, and we'd be okay. But again, they do have other offers on the table.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. What is next? Let's see. Next, Resolution 3625. This is proposing the amendment to the charter. And this is your bill, your resolution, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a simple resolution to ask the voters to amend our charter to add the Office of Multicultural Affairs as a standard presence on the fourth floor. And so what we've seen over the last, certainly the last year under this federal administration is if it's not in law, it doesn't necessarily happen. And so for me, one of the things is sort of I was going through the charter looking at different offices. This is one of the offices that has had the largest impact on communities that have been severely hampered over the last 8 months, certainly. And so having that constant presence, so no matter who's on the fourth floor, that this function is still being carried out is super important to the community members who are aided by this office. And so I didn't necessarily want that to be subject to personality. It should be a function that this county continues to do in perpetuity. And so this is simply a resolution asking the voters to say, hey, should this be a part of our dynamic and our DNA as we move forward? I certainly believe so, and that's what the charter does, or what the resolution does.
Are there any comments or questions? Administration?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. Obviously, the administration feels that this is a very important office, that it contributes greatly to the health and welfare and safety of our citizens, especially those who might not often be recognized and that can sort of be on the margins. So we are certainly supportive of taking measures to protect and preserve this office and make sure it continues regardless of who is in office on the fourth floor. I guess I would just highlight that there are other offices in the county that also do important work that aren't necessarily in the charter. The Office of Equity and Human Rights is one that does come to mind. So this is a relatively small office in comparison to a lot of the other offices and departments in county operations. So that's something to consider.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Has the administration thought about reorganizing this office to sit under, have you considered it all now that this charter amendment is before us, to reorganize the org chart in the executive branch to put this in a larger department, and then we would consider potentially putting a larger department in the charter?
I think that's an excellent question. I'm not aware that anyone has looked into that right now. This is an office of one person at the current time, so it lives in the, I believe it's under the CAO office, but that's certainly something we would be open to looking at.
I mean, the council can't tell you how to organize your staff, the county executive staff. It's just, this charter amendment does elevate an office of one when we have other offices. It's just something to think about.
I just wanted to clarify, again, it was the function that primarily is, while it might not be the largest office, the community that this office has been interacting with has probably been impacted the most, and certainly this last fiscal year or calendar year. And so for me, it's protecting that function so that it continues to be there in perpetuity from administration to administration, because it is a community that will need to be sort of reconstituted, or at least helped in the future here. And so having some ability within the county government where it sits, the previous county executive, actually all of you all have always taken at least the four that I've worked under and worked with, have taken a different lens on how they've organized their offices. The previous county executive had an internal versus external sort of facing view of how he was going to organize his county government. And so this office didn't exist then. It was a person that was performing those functions. But I think it's risen enough to the state that we should definitely do everything we can to help these communities that are in a disadvantage right now. And part of that is just providing some continuity on that function being there from cycle to cycle. That's all.
Any other questions, comments? All right, I believe. Is there any other business any council member would like to bring before the county council at this time? Seeing nothing, may I have a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The county council is adjourned until Monday, December 15th, 2025 at 7 p.m. for our next legislative session in our chambers.